The night was calm and quiet, with only the soft flicker of streetlights casting long shadows on the nearly empty roads. A light chill lingered in the air, a reminder that the day was ending and the night was settling in. Marcus Bell was driving home after a long, tiring day at the hospital. She was a black woman who had spent countless hours saving lives and comforting families. She gave everything she had to be the best doctor she could be, even when it meant pushing through exhaustion and fatigue. Tonight was no different. Her eyes felt heavy from lack of rest and long hours of work. She had barely eaten, surviving only on coffee and sheer determination. All she wanted was to get home, take a warm shower, and finally relax. The road ahead was mostly empty, the quiet making the small hum of her car seem louder than usual. If you care about stories that matter and justice for all, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's find out what happens next. As Marcus approached an intersection, suddenly red and blue flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Her heart dropped. Not again. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. This had happened before. The feeling of being pulled over for no real reason, the sudden rush of fear and uncertainty, that came every time she saw those flashing lights behind her. She sighed, signaling, and slowly pulled her car over to the side of the road. She had done nothing wrong. Her car's registration was up to date, and she wasn't speeding. But she knew that none of it mattered. To the officer, her innocence didn't count. Her heart pounded in her chest as old feelings of anxiety crept in. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself and steady her shaking hands. The officer stepped out of his cruiser. He adjusted his belt as he walked toward her car. His expression was serious, his eyes sharp and scanning. His hand hovered near his holster, a reminder of the power he held in this moment. The badge on his uniform read Officer Travis Beckett. His flashlight beam shined through the window, lighting up Marcus's face. He studied her as if searching for a reason to justify the stop. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "License and registration," the officer said in a firm, commanding voice. Marcus nodded, making sure her movements were slow and deliberate. "Yes, officer," she said quietly, reaching into the glove compartment. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like a heavy fog. She had been in situations like this before, times when one wrong move or a misunderstood action could turn the night upside down. She carefully found her documents and handed them over. Her hands were steady despite the tension hanging in the air. Officer Beckett took the papers without a word. As he looked at the ID, his eyes suddenly widened. His body stiffened. He stared at the name on the card like he had just seen a ghost. Dr. Marcus Bell. His hands trembled just a little as he looked back at the woman sitting in the driver's seat. "You're Dr. Bell?" he asked, his voice softer now. Marcus sighed and nodded. "Yes, officer." Recognition flashed in Beckett's eyes. The stern look on his face softened. This was the same Marcus Bell who had saved his own mother's life just a few months ago. The same doctor who had spent hours in the operating room trying to stop her internal bleeding after a near-fatal accident. The same Marcus Bell who had held Beckett's hand and promised his mother would be okay. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with things left unsaid. The power between them shifted, but even with that change, the damage had already been done. Beckett swallowed hard. His voice dropped lower, full of regret. I didn't realize it was you." Marcus looked at him, tiredness and disappointment clear in her eyes. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. "Would it have mattered if I wasn't?" Beckett had no answer. He knew the truth was hard to face. He had pulled over a woman not because of anything she had done, but because she fit a description, because of a bias he hadn't even fully understood until now. Looking at Marcus, the woman who had saved his family, he felt something unexpected. Shame. Marcus exhaled slowly and ran her hand through her short hair. "Officer Beckett, I remember you. I remember how scared you were for your mother. I did everything I could to save her, not because of who you are or what you look like, but because it was the right thing to do." Beckett's throat tightened as her words sank in. He cleared his throat and tried to speak, but Marcus held up her hand, stopping him. "Just do better, that's all I ask." He nodded slowly and took a step back. "You're free to go, ma'am." Marcus gave him one last look before driving away into the night. Beckett was left standing alone, lost in thought. The weight of what had happened settled on him. For the first time in a long time, he felt the heavy burden of his own choices. He stayed in his cruiser for a long time, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Change didn't happen all at once, but it had to begin somewhere, and for Officer Beckett, it started that night. That night, after Marcus drove away, Officer Beckett couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted. He sat alone in his cruiser for what felt like hours, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His mind raced with memories, moments when he had looked away, ignored the truth, or let his own biases guide his actions. He thought about the times he'd been quick to judge people by their appearance instead of who they really were, the uneasy glances exchanged with coworkers, the jokes he never challenged, and the silence he chose when he should have spoken up. All those little moments now felt heavier than ever. For the first time, he felt the weight of the prejudice that had lived inside him, hidden but real. He wondered how many others had faced stops like Marcus's, how many had been treated unfairly simply because of their skin color or the way they looked. The reality was clear. This wasn't just about one traffic stop. It was about a system built on assumptions and fear, a system that needed change. The next morning, Beckett did something he never thought he would. He drove straight to the hospital where Marcus worked. He needed to talk to her, to understand, to learn, and to find a way to be better. When Marcus finally came out of a long shift, tired but steady, she saw Beckett waiting. He took a deep breath, gathering courage. "I need to do better," he said honestly. "I don't know where to start, but I want to change." Marcus looked at him carefully, reading the sincerity in his eyes. She nodded slowly. Change isn't just words. It comes from actions, deciding to face the hard truths and do what's right. That day marked the beginning of something new for Beckett. He started attending community meetings and listening to stories from people who had been marginalized. He asked questions and worked to understand the pain and fear that came from being judged unfairly. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old habits tried to creep back in, but every time, Beckett reminded himself of the moment with Marcus, that moment when the truth hit him hard. Over the weeks, he stayed in touch with Marcus. He learned from her wisdom, patience, and strength. She shared her experiences, not with anger but with hope, that things could get better if people were willing to listen and change. Months later, Beckett stood before a group of new police recruits at the academy. He shared his story, the mistakes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned, and the journey ahead. He told them change is hard but necessary, that they must look beyond skin color and treat every person with respect and fairness. He spoke about the responsibility officers have, not just to enforce the law, but to serve their communities with honesty and compassion. His words weren't perfect, but they were real, and that made all the difference. For Beckett, this wasn't a one-time moment of apology. It was a lifelong promise to do better, to keep learning, and to challenge the biases inside himself and others. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks and struggles. But with every step, he wanted to make the world a little more just, one choice at a time. Meanwhile, Marcus continued her work at the hospital. She carried the memory of that night, not as a wound, but as a reminder of why her voice mattered. She used her strength to inspire change, showing that dignity and respect should never be optional. Their story became more than a single encounter. It became a ripple, touching lives beyond just them, reaching others who needed to hear that change was possible. If you believe in justice and fairness, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep these important stories alive and continue to push for a better future. Weeks passed, and the changes in Officer Beckett's life became clearer. He wasn't the same man who had pulled over Marcus Ocont on that chilly night. He started to see the world through different eyes, eyes that recognized the weight of every decision, every look, every word. Beckett began spending more time outside the cruiser, attending community events and listening sessions. He sat with families who had stories of pain and resilience. He heard from young black women who feared being stopped for no reason, from mothers worried about their daughters' safety, and from elders who had lived through decades of injustice. Each story left a mark on him. It was as if a curtain had lifted, showing the real faces behind the headlines and stereotypes. Beckett realized how easy it had been to treat people like cases or numbers instead of human beings with hopes, fears, and dreams. One evening, after a long day of community outreach, Beckett found himself walking past the hospital where Marcus worked. He paused outside, remembering the moment he had first met her, not as a suspect, but as a healer, a fighter, and a woman who saved lives without expecting anything in return. He knew he owed Marcus more than just an apology. He owed her a commitment to do the hard work every day, to stand up against the injustices he once ignored, and to use his position to protect, not to harm. At the police academy, Beckett's talks with the recruits were no longer just speeches. They were honest conversations about race, power, and responsibility. He shared his own failures openly, hoping that others would learn without having to face the same mistakes. He challenged his fellow officers to see beyond the badge and uniform, to remember that every person they stopped had a story, a family, and a life just as valuable as their own. Beckett's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Some colleagues resisted, uncomfortable with the change or unwilling to face their own biases. But others stepped forward, inspired by his honesty and dedication. Together they began forming small groups, focused on community trust and fairness. They trained officers on how to approach situations without jumping to conclusions, teaching empathy and patience. One afternoon, Marcus and Beckett met again, not by chance, but by choice. They sat together in a quiet cafe, talking about their shared hopes for the future. Marcus told Beckett about the young black women she had met who feared being stopped for the color of their skin. Beckett shared the stories of officers struggling to break free from old prejudices. They both agreed that change wouldn't come from quick fixes or empty promises. It would take time, patience, and courage. Marcus said, "We have to keep pushing, keep speaking up. The world needs more people willing to do that." Beckett nodded. "And I'll keep listening. That's the first step." Their friendship became a symbol, proof that understanding and respect could grow even from difficult moments. As months turned into a year, Beckett saw progress. Complaints about unfair stops began to drop in his precinct. Community members reported feeling safer and more respected, but Beckett knew this was only the beginning. The work to rebuild trust would never truly be finished. There would always be new challenges and setbacks. Still, he was hopeful. Hopeful because he had seen what was possible when people chose to listen, to learn, and to change. He understood now that justice isn't just about laws or punishments. It's about seeing every person fully, recognizing their humanity, and treating them with dignity. For Marcus, the change meant something personal too. It reminded her why her voice mattered, not just in the hospital, but in the world beyond. She continued to fight for fairness, both in medicine and in life, knowing that every small step could lead to a bigger difference. Their story spread, inspiring others to reflect on their own actions and biases. It became a call to action, a reminder that no one is above learning and growing. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread messages of hope and change. Together we can make a difference, one story at a time. Months after that night, the ripple effect of what happened between Marcus and Officer Beckett was clear in the community. Change wasn't instant, but it was happening. Beckett kept his promise to do better, not just with words, but with actions. He knew that trust had to be earned, and that would take more than just a few meetings or speeches. Beckett made it a point to visit neighborhoods often ignored by police. He showed up at local events, not as an officer patrolling, but as someone willing to listen and learn. He met black women and men, young and old, who shared their stories of fear and hope. Some told him about close calls with law enforcement, moments when they felt judged or unsafe simply because of how they looked. He heard about mothers afraid for their daughters, young women scared to walk alone at night, and teenagers trying to live their lives without being targets. Beckett understood that these stories weren't just complaints. They were real experiences that shaped how people saw the police and the justice system. At the police station, Beckett pushed for changes in training. He worked with community leaders to develop programs that taught officers how to recognize their own biases and handle encounters with care. The goal wasn't just to avoid conflict, but to build respect. Marcus kept working as a doctor, but she also became an advocate for justice. She spoke at schools and community centers, sharing her story and encouraging others to stand up for what's right. She wanted people to know that their voices mattered and that change begins when we demand fairness. One day, Marcus and Beckett organized a community forum where officers and residents could talk openly. It wasn't easy. Some people were angry, some were skeptical, but many showed up ready to listen. The conversations were honest and sometimes painful. Officers admitted mistakes. Community members shared fears. But through it all, a new understanding began to grow. Beckett realized that change wasn't about making everyone comfortable. It was about facing hard truths and doing better anyway. As time went on, Beckett saw officers in his precinct taking the lessons seriously. Complaints about racial profiling decreased. More officers volunteered for community outreach. The police and the neighborhoods they served were slowly becoming partners, not adversaries. Still, challenges remained. There were times when old habits and prejudices threatened to return. Beckett knew this was a battle that required constant effort. Marcus continued to inspire others by showing strength and resilience. She reminded everyone that one person's story could spark change, and that standing up against injustice was a collective responsibility. Their journey showed that real change comes not from anger or blame, but from understanding, respect, and the courage to admit when we're wrong. Beckett often thought about that night, the moment everything shifted for him. It wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. It was about recognizing the humanity in every person and the power each of us has to make the world better. He understood now that justice isn't a distant goal, but a daily choice, one made by how we treat each other every single day. Marcus and Beckett's story is a reminder that change starts with listening and grows with action. It's about breaking down walls, building bridges, and holding ourselves accountable. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps spread important voices and stories that inspire change. Together we can work toward a future where everyone is treated with fairness and dignity. Thank you for watching, and remember, every choice counts.